Alexander Thornton had just closed the biggest deal of his life, $200 million for the acquisition of a European hotel chain. As his Bentley crossed the golden gates of the family estate in Beverly Hills, his only thought was to celebrate with his wife Victoria and his 8-year-old daughter Emma. But what he saw in the driveway made him stop cold. A little girl sitting in the rain, barefoot, clutching a worn teddy bear and playing with colored marbles on the wet marble. When he approached and recognized her, his blood ran cold. It was Emma, his daughter, abandoned there like an object. Inside the mansion, a note from Victoria waited on the table with cruel words. She couldn't pretend to be a mother anymore. She had found someone who truly loved her. Emma was a burden she no longer wanted to carry. In that moment, Alexander realized that all his millions meant nothing if he couldn't protect the only person who truly mattered. Alexander Thornton was 42 years old and possessed everything a man could desire. The Thornton Holdings empire stretched from luxury real estate to hotel chains, from innovative technologies to Michelin-starred restaurants. His neoclassical mansion in Beverly Hills was worth $12 million, with gardens maintained by international landscapers and a pool that looked like something from an architecture magazine. That October afternoon, he was returning from Zurich, where he had just signed the contract that would make him one of the most influential entrepreneurs in America. The acquisition of the Heritage Hotels chain had required 6 months of intense negotiations, constant travel, and sleepless nights. But it had been worth it. $200 million invested to control 70 luxury hotels in 10 countries. During the flight from Zurich to Los Angeles, Alexander was already imagining the celebration evening. Victoria, his wife of 10 years, had organized an intimate dinner. His daughter Emma, 8 years old, would run to hug him as she always did when he returned from business trips. She was his princess, the only person in the world who could make him smile even in the most difficult moments. The black Bentley crossed the automatic gates of the mansion at 6:30 in the evening. The polished marble driveway reflected the sunset lights, creating a magical atmosphere. Alexander noticed it was drizzling slightly, unusual for that season. Butler James wasn't waiting at the entrance, which he found strange. That's when he saw her, a small figure sitting on the marble step of the entrance, under the light rain that was beginning to intensify. A little girl with long brown hair wet and falling on her shoulders, dressed in a yellow dress that had been elegant but now looked neglected. She was barefoot, with her little feet bare on the cold marble, and was clutching a worn and consumed brown teddy bear against her chest. In front of her, scattered on the wet pavement, were colored marbles that she collected and put back in line with mechanical gestures, as if it were a game that consoled her. She wasn't crying, wasn't calling for help. She was just there, motionless, with an expression of resignation that shouldn't belong to an 8-year-old girl. Alexander approached slowly, hoping he was wrong. But when the little girl raised her face toward him, his heart stopped. Those blue eyes were unmistakable. It was Emma, his daughter, abandoned in the rain in front of the house door like a forgotten package. The little girl looked at him without surprise, as if it were normal to be there. She didn't run to hug him as she always did. She didn't smile. She simply said, in a small, tired voice, that Mommy had gone away. Alexander felt the world collapse around him. He knelt next to Emma, ignoring that his $3,000 suit was getting wet. He took her in his arms, feeling how cold and trembling she was. He carried Emma inside the mansion, immediately noticing that something was wrong. The house was too quiet, too tidy. No dinner preparations, no cooking smells, no trace of the staff. On the entrance table, leaning against a crystal vase, there was a note written in Victoria's elegant handwriting. Alexander opened it with trembling hands, while Emma remained hugged to him. The words were like stabs to the heart. Victoria couldn't pretend to be a mother anymore. She had found someone who loved her for who she really was. Emma was a burden she no longer wanted to carry. Alexander read and reread those lines, unable to believe that the woman he had loved for 10 years could have abandoned her own daughter like a useless object. He looked at Emma, who had rested her head on his shoulder, and seemed exhausted. In that moment, he understood that all his successes, all his millions, all the contracts in the world meant nothing if he couldn't protect the only person who truly mattered, his daughter. In the following days, Alexander dedicated himself completely to Emma. He canceled all work appointments, postponed the most important meetings, and transformed his life from an entrepreneur always on the move to a father present 24 hours a day. The little girl was traumatized by the abandonment, spoke little, and often woke up at night looking for mommy. Alexander hired Dr. Sarah Collins, a competent and gentle child psychologist who immediately began working with Emma. During the first sessions, disturbing details emerged. Emma told that mommy was always sad and that she often left her alone at home for hours, telling her not to open to anyone and not to make noise. Victoria had started behaving strangely for at least 6 months. She went out often without saying where she was going, received mysterious phone calls, and when Alexander was traveling for work, Emma was increasingly entrusted to the housekeeper or left alone. The little girl had learned to cook simple meals for herself and to entertain herself alone for hours. Alexander felt an anger he had never experienced growing inside him. How had he failed to notice what was happening? Had he been so caught up in his business that he didn't see that his daughter was suffering and that his wife was planning to abandon her? He decided to investigate. He hired Marcus Rivera, the best private investigator in Los Angeles, to find out where Victoria was, and especially with whom. He didn't want to take her back. That was over forever. But he wanted answers. Emma deserved to know why her mother had abandoned her. The first discoveries came after a week. Victoria hadn't disappeared into thin air. She was living in a luxury penthouse in Monaco with Ricardo Santana, a 50-year-old Argentine playboy heir to an oil fortune. The investigators' photos showed Victoria smiling, tanned, shopping in the Principality's most expensive stores. But the most shocking discoveries came when Rivera dug deeper into Victoria's past life. The woman Alexander thought he knew was completely different. Her real name was Victoria Chen, not Morgan, as she had always said. She came from a poor family in San Francisco, not from the Manhattan high society as she had told. Her modeling career had been brief and not particularly brilliant. She had lived by expedience, frequenting rich men who supported her. Marriage to Alexander had been her stroke of luck, but evidently it wasn't enough. She had always continued to see other men, skillfully hiding her extramarital relationships. The investigator also discovered that Victoria had always considered pregnancy a mistake. She had even tried to convince Alexander to abort, but he had insisted on keeping the baby. Since Emma was born, Victoria had shown very little maternal interest, delegating everything to nannies and housekeepers. There were testimonies from neighbors and acquaintances who confirmed Victoria's growing detachment from the little girl in recent years. Emma was often left alone, even when she was younger. The woman would go out for entire days without explanations, leaving vague notes for the domestic staff. The most devastating discovery concerned the last days. Victoria had planned everything down to the smallest detail. She had emptied some bank accounts, sold jewelry and valuable objects, organized the transfer to Monaco. The evening Alexander left for Zurich, she had packed and left, leaving Emma completely alone in the house for 2 days. The little girl had survived eating what she found in the refrigerator, drinking tap water, sleeping alone in that enormous mansion. When Alexander returned, he had found her sitting outside because she couldn't get in anymore. Victoria had changed the alarm code before leaving. Alexander couldn't believe such cruelty. A mother who abandons her 8-year-old daughter, leaving her alone for days in an empty house, was something beyond his understanding. But what hurt him most was thinking about how much Emma had suffered in silence, never saying anything. That evening, while Emma finally slept peacefully, Alexander made a decision that would forever change their lives. He would never again allow anyone to hurt his daughter. He would become the father Emma deserved, the one he himself had failed to be when he was too caught up in work. The next day, he called his lawyer to start divorce proceedings and obtain exclusive custody of Emma. Victoria had spontaneously renounced her rights as a mother by abandoning the little girl. 3 months after the abandonment, Alexander and Emma had built a completely new routine. The man who used to work 14 hours a day now delegated most responsibilities and dedicated most of his time to his daughter. In the morning, he personally accompanied Emma to school. In the afternoon, they did homework together, went to the park, or cooked together. Alexander had discovered he loved these moments of everyday life that he had always considered boring before. Emma was gradually healing from the trauma of abandonment. Therapy with Dr. Collins was giving positive results, and the little girl had started smiling again. She no longer asked about Mommy, as if she had accepted that now their family consisted only of her and Daddy. Alexander had also transformed the mansion. The cold spaces had become more welcoming and child-friendly. He had installed a swing in the garden, filled the house with books, created a space where Emma could draw and play. Sundays had become their special days. They went to the movies, for pizza, to the park, or stayed home cooking together. They had become a close-knit team. The real progress could be seen in small gestures. Emma had started seeking Daddy when she woke up at night, fell asleep peacefully when he read her a story, told him everything that happened at school. He trusted him completely. One evening, while Emma was doing homework, the little girl asked him if now they would be just the two of them forever. Alexander looked at her, seeing in her eyes a maturity she shouldn't have at 8 years old. He promised they would always be together, that he would never leave her. In the following months, father and daughter developed an even deeper bond. Emma called him "my special daddy," and he considered her not only his daughter, but also his best friend. One day, Emma told him that maybe Mommy had gone away so they could become best friends. Alexander realized his daughter was right. Victoria's abandonment had allowed them to build an authentic relationship that didn't exist before. 6 months after Victoria's abandonment, Alexander and Emma had found their perfect balance. During a normal day at Central Park, fate decided to intervene. They saw a woman sitting on a bench crying softly. She was elegant, about 35, with long brown hair and an air of deep sadness. Emma, who had developed a particular sensitivity toward those who suffer, approached the woman despite Alexander trying to stop her. The little girl sat next to the stranger and offered her a tissue.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Gently asking why she was crying. The woman raised her face and smiled through tears. Her name was Julia Martinez. She was a pediatric doctor and had just lost her only son, Matthew, 10 years old, in a car accident 2 months earlier. From that day, their meetings in the park became routine. Emma had adopted Julia as a maternal figure, and the woman had found in that special little girl a reason to smile again. Alexander watched this bond grow with conflicting emotions. He was happy Emma had found a female reference figure, but was afraid to open his heart again. Julia was completely different from Victoria. She was authentic, generous, deeply in love with children because of her profession. She had dedicated her life to caring for little patients, and losing her son had devastated her, but hadn't made her cynical. Emma started asking to invite Dr. Julia home for dinner. Alexander agreed, discovering that Julia was an excellent cook and interesting conversationalist. She was cultured and intelligent, but above all, genuine. In the following months, Julia became an integral part of their lives. One evening, while Emma slept and the two of them were talking in the garden, Julia confessed her feelings to Alexander. She told him that he and Emma had filled the void that Matthew's death had left in her heart. Alexander told her the whole story of Victoria, the abandonment, the discovery of his wife's true nature. Julia listened without judging, understanding how difficult it had been for him and especially for Emma. That night, they kissed for the first time, under the garden stars. It was a sweet kiss, full of hope for the future. The next day, Emma found them having breakfast together and exploded with joy, asking if Dr. Julia could become her new mommy. Julia explained to Emma that she loved her as if she were her daughter, and that, if she agreed, they could become a special family. Emma hugged her tightly, whispering that she loved her. In that moment, Alexander understood that Victoria's abandonment had brought the right person into their lives at the right time. 2 years after the marriage with Julia, the Thornton mansion had become a completely different place. No longer the cold and perfect museum it had been with Victoria, but a real home full of warmth, laughter, and authentic love. Emma, now 14, had become an extraordinary girl. Intelligent, sensitive, and mature, she had inherited her father's determined character, but also Julia's sweetness and empathy. The two women loved each other like biological mother and daughter, perhaps even more, because their bond was born from mutual choice. Julia had left her hospital job to open a private pediatric practice that allowed her to be more present for Emma. Alexander had further reduced his work commitments, delegating many responsibilities and dedicating himself only to projects that truly passionate him. Their family routine was simple but precious. In the morning, they had breakfast together, planning the day. Emma went to school, Alexander to the office, Julia to her practice. In the afternoon, they met to accompany Emma to her activities: swimming, piano, theater. In the evening, they cooked together and told each other about their day. Weekends were sacred. Trips outside Los Angeles, walks by the lake, museum visits, movie nights at home. Emma had learned to appreciate these small family traditions that she never had with Victoria. Alexander often reflected on how much his life had changed. Before, he was always running, accumulating millions, but losing important moments. Now he had learned that true wealth was those family dinners, movies watched together on the sofa, Emma's laughter, Julia's goodnight kisses. Emma was growing up with security and serenity that Alexander had never seen when Victoria was there. The little girl who had been abandoned had become a strong girl aware of her own worth. Julia had helped her understand that her biological mother's abandonment wasn't her fault, but Victoria's failing as a person. One day, Emma asked Alexander if he had ever been truly happy with Victoria. Alexander thought for a long time before answering. He had to be honest with his daughter, who was now old enough to understand. He admitted he thought he was, but it was only the illusion of having a perfect family from the outside. With Julia, he had discovered what it meant to be truly happy. Emma nodded wisely. She also felt loved for who she was, not for who she should be. Alexander and Julia had also started talking about having a child together. Emma was enthusiastic about the idea of becoming a big sister, promising she would be the best in the world and would teach the little one everything about being a real family. A year later, Luke was born, a beautiful baby who brought even more joy to their house. Emma proved to be indeed a perfect big sister, protective and loving. Julia managed to balance the role of mother of 2 children with that of wife and professional, completely supported by Alexander. Their family had grown, but love had multiplied. Alexander watched Julia nursing Luke while Emma read her a story, and realized he had found true happiness. Not the artificial one he thought he had with Victoria, but the authentic one born from mutual love. Their family had become modern, built on love and not just blood ties. Alexander had learned that being a father means being present, listening, protecting, but also letting grow. Julia had shown that you can be a mother even without giving birth, when love is authentic and unconditional. 10 years had passed since that terrible evening when Alexander found Emma abandoned in the rain. Now Emma was 18 and had become an extraordinary young woman. She had just finished high school with top grades and was preparing to start psychology studies. Her dream was to become a child therapist to help children who had experienced family trauma. Julia and Alexander had built a solid and happy family. Luke was 9 years old and was a lively and affectionate child who adored both Emma and his parents. Their house was always full of friends, laughter, and future projects. Alexander had found the perfect balance between work and family. Thornton Holdings continued to prosper, but now he delegated a lot and concentrated only on projects that truly passionate him. He had also started a charitable foundation that helped single mothers and children in difficulty, inspired by his own experience. One day, Emma received an unexpected phone call. It was Victoria. After 10 years of total silence, the woman who had abandoned her wanted to see her again. Emma listened to her biological mother's voice without particular emotions. Victoria was crying on the phone, saying she had made the biggest mistake of her life, that wealth and worldly life hadn't made her happy, that she always thought about the daughter she had abandoned. The story she told was predictable. Ricardo Santana had left her after a few years for a younger woman. She had squandered all the money, found herself alone and full of debts. Now she lived in a small apartment in Nice, worked as a saleswoman, and had understood how stupid she had been to abandon the only truly precious thing, her daughter. Emma listened to everything without saying a word. When Victoria finished, the girl spoke with a maturity that surprised even herself. She called the woman by her first name instead of saying, "Mom," explaining that she was 18 and had built her life without her. She had a family that loved her, a future ahead, and had processed the trauma of abandonment. She didn't hate her, but she was no longer her mother. That was Julia. Victoria begged to be able to meet her at least once. Emma thought about it for days, talking at length with Alexander and Julia. Finally, she decided to accept, but on her conditions. The meeting took place in a Los Angeles cafe, with Alexander and Julia present. Victoria had aged poorly. Her 45 years showed more. She was still beautiful, but had lost that confidence and elegance that had always characterized her. When she saw Emma, she burst into tears. Her daughter had become a stunning, intelligent, and confident young woman. Everything she had never managed to be. Emma looked at her with compassion, but without yielding to emotion. She calmly explained what it had meant to be abandoned as a child, how she had suffered, how she had felt rejected. But she also explained how Alexander and Julia had helped her heal, grow, become the person she was now. She established conditions. Victoria could stay in her life, but as a friend, not as a mother. She couldn't take back a role she had voluntarily abandoned. Emma forgave her, but couldn't pretend the abandonment hadn't happened. Victoria accepted those conditions, knowing she had no alternatives. In the following months, she began sporadically frequenting the Thornton family, always maintaining distances and respecting the roles Emma had established. Gradually, Victoria began to realize how fortunate she had been to have had a family like the one she had destroyed. Alexander had become a wonderful father. Julia was the mother Emma had always deserved, and together they had built something beautiful. Emma allowed her to be present at her graduation, her wedding, the birth of her first child, but always as a guest, never as a central figure. The role of grandmother belonged to Julia, who had raised Emma and loved her unconditionally. Over the years, Victoria found a sort of peace in seeing how happy and balanced the daughter she had abandoned was. Emma had become a respected child psychologist, had her own family, was surrounded by Alexander and Julia's love. One day, Victoria confessed to Emma that she was proud of the woman she had become, even though she couldn't take any credit. Julia and her father had done an extraordinary job. Emma smiled, explaining that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or erasing the past, but accepting what happened and choosing not to let pain condition the future. She had chosen love and family, and this had made her happy. Alexander, now 55, looked at his daughter with infinite pride. The little girl abandoned in the rain had become a strong, compassionate, and wise woman. Victoria's abandonment had allowed Emma to find Julia's true love and grow in an authentic family. On the evening of Alexander's 60th birthday, while the whole family was gathered in the garden, he made a special toast. 10 years before, he thought finding Emma abandoned was the worst thing that could happen to him. Now, he knew it had been the best. It had taught him what it truly meant to be a father, had made him meet Julia, had shown him that true love is the one that chooses to stay. Emma raised her glass, adding that she had learned that real families aren't those born from blood, but those built with love, patience, and the daily choice to love each other. That night, Alexander thought about how strange life had been. He had started with a fake family and ended with a real one. He had lost a wife who had never truly loved him and found a woman who loved him for who he was. Emma had lost a biological mother who abandoned her and found a mother of the heart who had always protected her. Sometimes the most painful losses open the way to the greatest joys, and sometimes you have to be abandoned to discover who will truly love you forever. Like if you believe that real families are built with love, not just blood. Comment which moment of the story touched you most. Share to inspire those who still believe in the power of authentic family love. Subscribe for more stories of second chances and families of the heart. Sometimes you have to lose a fake family to find a real one. Sometimes abandonment opens the path to the greatest love. And sometimes the deepest wounds become the source of the purest wisdom. Because true love isn't the one born by chance, but the one that chooses to stay forever.